Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Some women are born to shine in the shadows. And at 32, Elise Moreau had made an art of being magnificently invisible. Golden Manhattan sunlight streamed across her walnut desk as she reviewed the Crestwood acquisition contracts. Her manicured fingers tracing columns of numbers that would make or break a $40 million deal. She possessed the kind of razor-sharp intelligence that could dissect a failing merger over breakfast and resurrect it before lunch. Yet the brass nameplate on her office door read simply, Moreau Consulting. No mention of the empire she had quietly built from behind the scenes. Ms. Langston, her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, using the married name that felt increasingly foreign on Elise's tongue. Your husband's office called. The Whitestone project needs immediate attention. Elise's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Another crisis for her to solve. While Victor Langston collected the credit and posed for magazine covers, she glanced at the latest issue of Manhattan Business Weekly propped against her computer monitor. Victor's confident smile dominated the cover beneath the headline, The Golden Touch. How Victor Langston turns dreams into empires. If they only knew the truth. Tell them I'll handle it, Elise replied, already pulling up the Whitestone files. 3 months ago, she had warned Victor about the zoning complications that would plague this project. He had dismissed her concerns with a patronizing smile and a pat on her hand, treating her like a child playing dress-up in the corporate world. Now, facing city council rejections and furious investors, he desperately needed her expertise to clean up his mess. She had been cleaning up his messes for 8 years. The irony wasn't lost on her that Elise Moreau, the girl from Bedford-Stuyvesant who had clawed her way through Columbia Business School on scholarships and determination, now spent her days rescuing the ventures of a man who introduced her at parties as his lovely wife rather than his business partner. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken on her wedding day with prophetic wisdom. Baby girl, a woman should always have a door she can walk through without asking for permission. Elise had kept her own doors. Her personal investment portfolio, carefully curated and legally separate from Victor's holdings, included controlling stakes in 2 major suppliers that formed the backbone of Langston Enterprises' construction projects. Victor knew she had some investments, but he had never bothered to ask for details. In his world, wives collected art and planned charity galas. They didn't accumulate corporate power. His oversight would prove costly. The Whitestone crisis consumed her morning, requiring delicate negotiations with city officials and a complete restructuring of the development timeline. By noon, she had salvaged the project and saved Victor's reputation again. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. Heard you worked magic on Whitestone. Thanks, sweetheart. Dinner tonight with the Carver Group. Wear the blue dress. No acknowledgement of her brilliance. No gratitude for saving his $20 million investment. Just instructions on what to wear, as if she were his accessory rather than his salvation. Elise stared at the message until the screen went dark, seeing her reflection in the black surface. High cheekbones inherited from her Haitian grandmother, skin the color of rich coffee, eyes that held depths Victor had never bothered to explore. She was beautiful, successful, and utterly invisible in her own marriage. The Carver Group dinner was held at Le Bernard, where crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables filled with Manhattan's business elite. Elise wore the requested blue dress, a stunning sapphire creation that hugged her curves and made her skin glow. But she might as well have been wallpaper. The men discussed deals, while their wives compared vacation homes and designer handbags. The Brooklyn waterfront project is revolutionary, Victor was saying, gesturing expansively with his wine glass. We're talking about transforming an entire neighborhood, creating jobs, revitalizing the community. Elise bit back a smile. She had conceived that project, spending months walking those Brooklyn streets, talking to longtime residents, understanding their needs and dreams, the community gardens, the affordable housing component, the local business incentives, all her ideas, now flowing from Victor's lips as if they had sprung fully formed from his mind. Victor has such vision, gushed Margaret Carver, the wife of their potential investor. How does he come up with these innovative concepts? It's all about listening, Victor replied smoothly, understanding what communities really need. The lies came so easily to him now. Elise wondered when she had become complicit in this charade. when she had started accepting credit stolen in small increments until nothing remained for her. "And what do you do, Elise?" asked Thomas Carver, finally acknowledging her presence. Before she could answer, Victor's hand found hers, squeezing with just enough pressure to signal her to stay quiet. "Elise keeps me grounded," he said with his most charming smile. "She's my inspiration, my muse, behind every successful man, right?" The table laughed politely. Elise's smile felt carved from ice. But then something shifted in the restaurant's atmosphere. A figure appeared beside their table, tall, commanding, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see everything. The maitre d' was leading him to a nearby table. When those eyes found Elise's face, recognition hit like lightning. "Elise Moreau." The voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by years, but unmistakably familiar. Julian Kessler. His name fell from her lips like a prayer she thought she had forgotten. Law school study sessions that stretched until dawn. Coffee-fueled debates about justice and integrity. The boy who had believed she could change the world, who had seen her potential when she could barely see it herself. "You two know each other?" Victor's voice carried a sharp edge. "Columbia Law," Julian replied, his gaze never leaving Elise's face. "We were study partners. Elise was the smartest person in our class." The words hung in the air like an accusation. When was the last time someone had called her smart in Victor's presence? When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen her mind rather than her marriage? "That's wonderful," Margaret Carver chirped. "Small world, isn't it?" "Indeed," Julian said, but his eyes remained locked with Elise's. "I was just thinking about our constitutional law discussions. You had such fascinating perspectives on corporate accountability and justice." Heat crept up Elise's neck. He remembered. After all these years, he remembered their conversations, their dreams, their late-night debates about using law to protect the powerless against predatory business practices. "That was a long time ago," she said softly. "Some things don't change," Julian replied. "Intelligence, integrity, the desire to fight for what's right." Victor's grip on her hand tightened to the point of pain. "Well, Elise's fighting days are behind her now. She's got better things to worry about than dusty legal theories." The dismissal was casual, practiced, devastating. Elise watched something flicker in Julian's eyes. Surprise, then understanding, then something that looked dangerously close to anger. "I'm sure she does," Julian said quietly. Then, to Elise, "Perhaps we could catch up sometime. I'd love to hear about your current work." "Elise doesn't work," Victor interjected with a laugh. "I'm lucky enough to take care of her. She keeps busy with charity events and such." The lie was so complete, so smoothly delivered, that for a moment, even Elise questioned her own reality. But Julian's eyes never wavered from her face. And she saw something there that she hadn't seen in years. Recognition of who she really was. "Of course," Julian said diplomatically. He handed her a business card, the gesture formal, but his fingers brushed hers deliberately. "In case you ever need anything, legal advice or just a friendly ear." After he was seated at his own table, the dinner conversation resumed, but Elise felt fundamentally changed. The business card burned in her palm, and she found herself stealing glances across the restaurant at the man who had once believed she could conquer the world. Julian Kessler, partner at Kessler and Associates, the boy who had become a man who had found success on his own terms, who still looked at her as if she mattered, as if she were visible. On the drive home, Victor was unusually quiet, his jaw set in hard lines. When they reached their penthouse, he finally spoke. "Old boyfriend?" "Study partner," Elise corrected. "I told you." He looked at you like he wanted to study more than law books. Elise said nothing, tucking the business card deeper into her purse. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. That night, as Victor slept beside her, Elise stared at the ceiling and remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be valued for her mind, her capabilities, her potential to change the world. She had forgotten that she was more than just Ms. Langston. But Julian Kessler remembered, and in the darkness of her gilded cage, that memory felt like the first crack in a wall she hadn't even realized she had built around herself. Chapter 2. Forbidden Attraction. The business card haunted Elise's thoughts, like a secret she couldn't stop touching. 3 days after the Carver dinner, she found herself staring at Julian Kessler's name, embossed in elegant script, the card hidden beneath a stack of acquisition reports in her desk drawer. She had pulled it out 17 times since Tuesday, memorizing every detail. The address of his law firm, the curve of his signature, the way light caught the raised lettering. Each time, she tucked it away like contraband. Ms. Langston. Her assistant's voice made Elise slam the drawer shut. The Riverfront project team is here for the 10 meeting. Elise straightened, slipping back into her role as the invisible architect of Victor's success. The Riverfront project, another one of her concepts being presented under her husband's name, needed her strategic guidance to navigate environmental concerns that could derail the entire development. For the next 2 hours, she dissected zoning laws, restructured timeline projections, and solved problems that had stumped Victor's highly paid consultants for weeks. The team hung on her every word, scribbling notes and nodding with the reverence usually reserved for industry legends. Brilliant as always. Ms. Langston, said Michael Park, the lead architect. How did you think to approach the wetlands issue from that angle? Experience, Elise replied simply, though the truth was more complex. She had spent her childhood summers with her grandmother in Louisiana, learning to read the subtle signs of land that held water, understanding the delicate balance between development and preservation. That knowledge, combined with her business acumen, made her invaluable and invisible. After the meeting, Elise found herself walking through Central Park, needing air and space to think. The October afternoon was crisp, leaves painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her of the warmth she had seen in Julian's eyes. Elise, she turned, heart-stopping. Julian stood 20 feet away, looking distinguished in a charcoal coat, a leather briefcase in his hand, and something unreadable in his expression. I was hoping I might run into you, he said, approaching slowly, as if she might bolt. I walk through the park most afternoons after court. Helps me think. I needed air, she admitted, then wondered why she felt compelled to explain herself to him. They fell into step together, the silence comfortable in a way that surprised her. This was dangerous territory, walking with another man, feeling the pull of attraction she hadn't experienced in years, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. You've done well for yourself, Elise said, noting the quiet confidence in his bearing. Senior partner at a respected law firm. From what I can see, senior partner. Actually, there was modest pride in his voice, but no arrogance. We handle corporate accountability cases mostly. David and Goliath situations, you could say. Elise smiled despite herself. Still fighting the good fight. Someone has to. He glanced at her sideways. What about you? Are you really not working? Or was your husband just being protective the other night? The question hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or burn. Elise stopped walking, facing him fully for the first time. I consult, she said carefully. Strategic development, project management, crisis resolution for Langston Enterprises. Among others, it wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Julian studied her face with the same intensity he had once reserved for contract law, and she felt exposed in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The Brooklyn waterfront project, he said suddenly, the one your husband was discussing at dinner, the community integration aspects, the environmental safeguards, that was you, wasn't it? Heat flooded her cheeks. What makes you say that? Because I remember how you used to talk about responsible development, how you wanted to build bridges between communities instead of walls. That project sounds exactly like something you would design. The recognition in his voice was like sunlight after years of shadow. Someone saw her work. Someone understood what she was trying to accomplish. It doesn't matter who conceived it, she said quietly. What matters is that it gets built right. It matters, Elise. His voice was fierce, urgent. Your ideas, your brilliance, it matters. You matter. The words hit her like a physical force. When was the last time someone had told her she mattered? When was the last time she had believed it herself? Julian, she began. But he stepped closer, and the words died in her throat. I never forgot you, he said softly. Even after law school, even through my marriage and divorce, even when years passed without contact, I never forgot the woman who could argue constitutional law until 3:00 inches the morning and still have energy to solve the world's problems. That woman was very young, Elise whispered. Very naive. That woman was extraordinary. She still is. The space between them seemed charged with electricity. Elise felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by a magnetic pull she hadn't experienced in years, but reality crashed over her like cold water. I'm married, she said, stepping back unhappily. The word hung in the air between them, too true to deny, and too dangerous to acknowledge. "You don't know that," she protested weakly. "Don't I?" Julian's gray eyes were steady, compassionate, devastating in their clarity. "I saw how he talked to you, how he dismissed your intelligence, your contributions. That's not how a man treats a woman he loves and respects." Elise wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the afternoon sun. "It's complicated. Love shouldn't be complicated, Elise. It should be simple, clear. A partnership between equals who see the best in each other. Is that what you had?" she asked, deflecting. "In your marriage?" Julian was quiet for a long moment. "No," he admitted. "Clara wanted me to be someone I wasn't, more ruthless, more willing to compromise my principles for profit. She left me for a corporate lawyer who charges 4 times my rate and has no problem defending companies that poison rivers. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me what I don't want, what I won't accept." He paused, his gaze intense, "and what I will fight for." The implication in his words made Elise's pulse race, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Where are you?" Whitestone meeting moved up to 4. Need damage control. Another crisis. Another mess for her to clean up while he took the credit. "I have to go," she said, hating the disappointment in her own voice. "Of course." Julian handed her another business card, this one with his personal cell phone number written on the back in strong, decisive handwriting. "In case you ever need to talk about business, about law, about anything." Their fingers brushed as she took the card, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. For a moment, they stood frozen, connected by touch and possibility, and the weight of everything unspoken between them. Then Elise pulled away, tucking the card into her coat pocket next to her heart. "Take care of yourself, Elise," Julian said softly. "You deserve so much more than being invisible." She walked away without looking back, but she felt his eyes on her until she disappeared around the corner. All the way to her car, her skin tingled where he had touched her, and her mind replayed his words. "You deserve so much more than being invisible." The Whitestone meeting was exactly what she expected. Victor, in full charm mode, deflecting blame while she presented the solutions she had crafted to save the project. The investors left satisfied, the crisis averted, and Victor basked in praise for his brilliant strategy. "Couldn't have done it without my secret weapon," he told the room with an indulgent smile, as if Elise were a lucky charm rather than the architect of their salvation. That night, Victor was in a celebratory mood, booking dinner reservations at their favorite restaurant and suggesting they invite friends to join them. But Elise felt like she was watching her life through glass, separate from the laughter and conversation swirling around her. "You seem distracted tonight," observed Rachel Hartwell, one of the other wives. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," Elise replied automatically. But her hand drifted to her coat pocket where Julian's card waited like a lifeline. She excused herself to the ladies' room and pulled out her phone, staring at the number he had written in his careful script. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed a message. "Thank you for seeing me today. Really seeing me. It meant more than you know." She hit send before courage could abandon her. The response came within minutes. "You are impossible to miss, Elise. You shine too brightly to ever truly be invisible." Standing in the marble-appointed restroom of New York's most exclusive restaurant, reading words that made her feel more valued than 8 years of marriage, Elise finally understood what her grandmother had meant about keeping doors open. Some doors led back to who you used to be. Some doors led forward to who you might become. And some doors, if you were brave enough to walk through them, led to the person who had been waiting for you all along. When she returned to the dinner table, Victor was deep in conversation with his friends about a weekend golf trip to the Hamptons. He didn't notice that she had been gone for 10 minutes. He didn't notice the flush in her cheeks or the way her eyes sparkled with something that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time in years, Elise felt fully alive. And for the first time in her marriage, she felt the stirrings of something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Hope. Chapter 3. The trap is set. The blow came on a Monday morning, delivered by a man in a $5,000 suit who smiled like he was handing her flowers instead of a death sentence. Elise looked up from the Hillcrest development contracts to find a stranger standing in her office doorway, tall, silver-haired, with the predatory confidence of a Manhattan attorney who billed by the minute. "Ms. Langston." His voice was smooth as aged whiskey and twice as poisonous. "Yes." She set down her pen, instinctively straightening in her chair. Nathaniel Sterling, attorney for Mr. Victor Langston. He stepped into her office without invitation, closing the door behind him with deliberate precision. "I have some documents that require your immediate attention." The manila envelope he placed on her desk felt heavy as lead. Inside were legal papers, crisp with formality and malice. The words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," stamped across the top in letters that seemed to burn through the page. Elise's hands remained steady as she read, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Asset division, spousal support terms that painted her as a dependent spouse entitled to minimal compensation for 8 years of invisible labor. The prenuptial agreement, signed when she was 24 and foolishly in love, would leave her with virtually nothing. The penthouse, the art collection, the business interests she had helped build, all of it, would remain with Victor. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the back page that made her blood freeze. "By the time you read this, the board will have voted you out of every position. You've been a wonderful accessory, darling, but it's time for an upgrade. Try not to make this difficult." Sterling watched her read with the satisfaction of a cat who had cornered a mouse. "Mr. Langston has asked me to expedite these proceedings. He's prepared to be generous with temporary support if you sign quickly and quietly." Elise set the papers down with hands that betrayed nothing of the earthquake happening inside her chest. 8 years. 8 years of building his empire, solving his crises, saving his reputation, while he collected credit and magazine covers. And this was how it ended. With a lawyer's smirk and a note that reduced her to an accessory. "I'll need time to review these documents," she said, her voice steady as granite. "Of course." Sterling straightened his tie. "Mr. Langston hopes you'll see reason. Fighting this would be unproductive for everyone involved." The threat was elegant in its subtlety. Elise had seen Victor destroy people who crossed him, using his wealth and connections to bury them so thoroughly they disappeared from their own industries. He expected her to fold, to accept his terms, to vanish quietly into the shadows she had occupied for so long. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. After Sterling left, Elise sat in the silence of her office, staring at papers that represented the end of everything she had built. But beneath the shock and hurt, something else was stirring, something sharp and calculating and utterly without mercy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Sorry you had to find out this way. Lawyers insisted on formal service. Let's keep this civilized." Civilized? As if there were anything civilized about ambushing your wife with divorce papers while simultaneously destroying her professional life. As if civility could exist alongside betrayal of this magnitude. She needed to get out of the office before she did something foolish, like throw her computer through the window or call Victor and say things that couldn't be taken back. Her hands shook as she gathered her purse and the divorce papers, the weight of her crumbling life suddenly unbearable. Central Park was nearly empty in the late afternoon, the October chill keeping all but the most determined joggers indoors. Elise found herself on the same bench where she and Julian had parted ways 3 days ago, when her biggest problem had been resisting the pull of attraction to a man who wasn't her husband. Now her husband was no longer her husband, or wouldn't be once the papers were final. The irony was devastating. Her phone rang, and without thinking, she answered. "Elise." Julian's voice was warm, concerned. "I was just thinking about you. How or what's wrong?" She hadn't said a word, but somehow he heard the devastation in her breathing. "I'm in the park," she said, and her voice cracked on the words, "I'll be right there." "Julian, you don't need to." "I'll be right there," he repeated, and the line went dead. 15 minutes later, she saw him jogging toward her across the grass, still wearing his court suit, but having abandoned his tie somewhere along the way. The sight of him, this man who dropped everything to come to her when she needed him, broke something open in her chest. What happened? He sat beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel his warmth but careful not to touch without permission. She handed him the divorce papers without a word. Watched his face change as he read. Saw the muscle jump in his jaw when he reached the asset division. Witnessed the flash of pure fury when he found Victor's note. "This bastard," Julian said quietly, and the controlled rage in his voice made her look up. "This absolute bastard. He served me at work," Elise said, and suddenly the words were pouring out. "Had his lawyer walk into my office like it was a business meeting. 8 years, Julian, 8 years of building his empire, and he thinks he can just discard me." "The prenup is unconscionable," Julian said, flipping through pages with professional efficiency. The asset division ignores your contributions to his business. Any competent attorney could challenge this. With what money? He's cutting me off from everything. The full scope of her situation was becoming clear. No income, no access to our accounts, no professional reputation left after he's done destroying it. Julian set the papers aside and turned to face her fully. Elise, look at me. She met his eyes, seeing something there that made her breath catch. You are not powerless, he said with quiet intensity. You are not some helpless, dependent wife. You are Elise Moreau, the woman who graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Law, who built a real estate empire while her husband took credit, who can solve problems that stump teams of experts. That woman feels very far away right now. She's right here. His hand found hers, warm and steady, and she's about to remind your soon-to-be ex-husband why underestimating her was the biggest mistake of his life. The contact sent warmth shooting up her arm, but it was his words that truly reached her. He saw her strength when she couldn't find it herself. He believed in her capabilities when her world was crumbling. I don't know how to fight this, she admitted. Then let me help you. His gray eyes were fierce with determination. Let me represent you. Let me show this arrogant fool what happens when he tries to erase someone as extraordinary as you. Julian, I can't afford. Pro bono, he said firmly. This isn't about money, Elise. This is about justice. This is about making sure that brilliant women don't get thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. She stared at him. This man who was offering to fight her battles without expecting anything in return, who saw her worth when her own husband had reduced her to a footnote. Why? She whispered. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her ache. Because you matter. Because your contributions matter. Because someone needs to stand up and say that what he's doing is wrong. And because you care about me? Yes, he said simply, because I care about you more than I should, probably. But I stopped caring about should when I saw you across that restaurant and realized you were exactly as magnificent as I remembered. The admission hung between them, honest and devastating and full of possibility. Elise felt tears burn her eyes, not from grief anymore, but from something that felt dangerously close to hope. If we do this, she said slowly, if you help me fight him, people will talk. They'll assume things about us. Let them talk. Julian's voice was steady as stone. I've spent too many years caring what people think. I won't watch you get destroyed because I'm worried about appearances. Elise looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers intertwined with hers like they belonged there. For 8 years, she had been half of a marriage where she was invisible, unvalued, taken for granted. Now this man was offering her something she had almost forgotten existed. Partnership. Recognition. Respect. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. Help me fight him. She lifted her eyes to meet his, feeling steel return to her spine. Help me show Victor Langston what happens when he tries to erase the woman who made him everything he is. Julian smiled, and it was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Now you sound like the Elise I remember. As the sun set over Central Park, casting long shadows across the grass, Elise felt something shift inside her. The victim who had been served papers that morning was gone. In her place sat a woman who had been pushed too far, who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Victor thought he had trapped her. He thought he had stripped away her power, her options, her ability to fight back. He had no idea that in trying to destroy her, he had just awakened the most formidable opponent he would ever face. And he had no idea that she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Chapter 4. The counterstrike begins. War was a game best played by those who understood that the most devastating weapons were often hidden in plain sight. Elise sat in Julian's law office at 7 inches the morning, watching him review documents by the golden light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and his usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a gesture she remembered from their law school study sessions. Your husband made a critical error, Julian said, looking up from the portfolio spread across his walnut desk. He assumed your assets were negligible because you kept them separate. Grandmother's advice, Elise replied. Sipping coffee that tasted like liquid clarity, she always said a smart woman keeps her own keys. Julian smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. Your grandmother was brilliant. These holdings are substantial. Elise, more than substantial. They are strategically positioned. The documents told a story Victor had never bothered to read. Over 8 years, while he collected accolades for her ideas, Elise had quietly built a portfolio worth $37 million, not in glamorous stocks or trendy tech companies, but in the unglamorous backbone of construction. Concrete suppliers, steel fabricators, specialty contractors, companies that Langston Enterprises couldn't function without. Pinnacle Concrete. Julian read from the list. 68% ownership. They supply concrete for 70% of Langston Enterprises projects. Victor introduced me to the owner 5 years ago at a charity gala, Elise said with satisfaction. Poor man was facing bankruptcy after his partner embezzled funds. I helped him restructure his debt and invested in exchange for controlling interest and Titan steel fabrication. Same story. Different crisis, family business, third generation, facing closure due to market changes. I invested in their modernization and expansion. Elise leaned back in her chair, feeling power flow through her veins like wine. Victor thinks I spend my days shopping and planning dinner parties. He has no idea that I've been building my own empire. Julian stared at her with something approaching awe. You've been playing chess while he's been playing checkers for 8 years. The satisfaction in her voice was unmistakable. Every crisis he dismisses, every problem he ignores. I find solutions that benefit both him and me. The difference is, I make sure I hold the cards, and now it's time to play them. At exactly 9 a.m., Elise made the first call. Robert Pinnacle, CEO of Pinnacle Concrete, answered on the second ring. Elise, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you? I need you to freeze all deliveries to Langston Enterprises projects, effective immediately, she said calmly. Tell them there are concerns about pending legal matters that require resolution. There was a brief pause. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Robert. This is just a business precaution. Can you do this for me? Of course. You saved my company, Elise. Whatever you need. The second call went to Sofia Alvarez at Titan Steel Fabrication. The conversation was nearly identical. The result exactly the same. By 10 a.m., construction on 4 major Langston Enterprises projects had ground to a halt. By noon, Victor's phone was ringing off the hook with angry contractors, furious investors, and panicked project managers demanding answers he didn't have. Julian watched Elise orchestrate the chaos with professional admiration and something deeper, more personal. Remind me never to get on your bad side, he said as she ended her final call. This is just the beginning, Elise replied, but there was no cruelty in her voice. Only cold justice. He wanted to destroy me. Fine. Let's see how his empire functions without the woman who actually built it. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Victor. She declined it, letting it go to voicemail. Then another call. Another decline. By the 5th attempt, Julian raised an eyebrow. Aren't you curious what he has to say? I know exactly what he has to say. First confusion, then anger, then attempted negotiation. Elise's smile was sharp as winter glass. I've watched him handle crises for 8 years. He follows the same pattern every time. As if to prove her point, her phone buzzed with a text. What the hell is happening with the suppliers? Call me immediately. Then another. Elise, this is serious. People are asking questions. And finally, we need to talk. Whatever this is, we can work it out, right on schedule, she murmured, showing Julian the messages. You really do know him well. I know him perfectly. That's why this is going to work. Elise stood, gathering her purse and the portfolio of documents. He thinks in straight lines. Attack, defend, win, lose. He can't conceive of a strategy that plays out over years. Where are you going? The question in Julian's voice made her pause. There was something territorial in his tone, something that spoke to feelings he was trying to keep professional. Home to pack, she said. I think it's time I moved out of the penthouse. Can't have him claiming I'm living off his generosity while we're in litigation. Where will you go? The concern in his gray eyes made her chest tighten with emotions she wasn't ready to examine. I have a place, a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights I bought 3 years ago as an investment property. It's been renovated but never occupied. You bought real estate without telling him. I bought it through a shell corporation, legal, ethical, and completely private. Elise smiled at his expression. Julian, I may have been invisible in my marriage, but I was never powerless. I just let him think I was. The revelation seemed to affect him profoundly. He stood, moving closer, until she could smell his cologne, something crisp and masculine that made her remember what it felt like to be desired by a man who saw her true worth. Elise, he said softly, You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." The compliment hit her like sunlight after years of shadows. When was the last time Victor had called her extraordinary? When was the last time he had looked at her with the admiration she saw in Julian's eyes? "I should go," she said, but made no move to leave. "Should," Julian repeated, stepping closer. "That word again. This is complicated. You're getting divorced. It's the least complicated your situation has been in years." He was right, but that didn't make it simple. Standing in his office with afternoon light, painting patterns on the walls and the evidence of her strategic brilliance spread across his desk, Elise felt the pull of attraction stronger than gravity. She began, but he interrupted. "We don't have to decide anything today," he said gently. "But I want you to know that what I feel for you isn't gratitude or nostalgia or the thrill of an old memory. It's real, Elise. It's based on who you are now, this incredible woman who just brought a real estate empire to its knees before lunch." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Julian, I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. "Whatever you need, however long this takes, I'm here." The promise hung between them, honest and patient and full of possibilities that made her heart race. For 8 years, she had been the one providing support, solving problems, being endlessly available for someone who never returned the favor. Now this man was offering her the same unconditional loyalty she had always given, but never received. Her phone rang again, Victor, persistent as always, but she ignored it. Lost in Julian's steady gaze, "I should really go back," she said finally. "Let me help you." "Julian, you don't need to. I want to." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Besides, I want to see this secret brownstone of yours." The drive to Manhattan was quiet, both of them lost in thought as the city streamed past the windows of Julian's BMW. At the penthouse, Elise felt like a stranger revisiting a life that no longer fit. Everything looked the same: the imported Italian marble, the carefully curated art collection, the panoramic views of Central Park, but she saw it now through different eyes. This wasn't her home. It was Victor's stage, and she had been just another prop in his carefully constructed image of success. "How long were you planning this?" Julian asked, watching her pack with the efficiency of someone who had mentally rehearsed this moment. "Planning what?" "Your escape." This wasn't a spontaneous decision, was it? Elise folded a silk blouse, considering how much to reveal. "After the first time he took credit for one of my projects, I started protecting myself. I didn't know it would end like this. But I knew someday I might need my own resources." Remarkably prescient. "My grandmother used to say that a woman who doesn't prepare for independence will find herself dependent on men who don't deserve her." Elisa smiled sadly. "I wish she could have lived to meet you." The comment slipped out before she could stop it, too intimate and revealing for their carefully maintained boundaries. But Julian's answering smile was worth the risk. "I wish I could have met her too," he said softly. She raised an extraordinary granddaughter. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the penthouse in shades of gold and amber, Elise finished packing 8 years of her life into 4 suitcases. It should have felt like an ending, but with Julian helping her carry boxes and making quiet observations that revealed how closely he was paying attention to everything about her, it felt more like a beginning. Tomorrow, Victor would wake up to discover that his wife, the woman he had dismissed as a decorative accessory, had vanished along with the foundational elements of his business empire. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. But tonight, for the first time in years, Elise fell asleep with the certainty that she wasn't fighting alone. Chapter 5. Building the Case. The women who gathered in Elise's Brooklyn Heights brownstone Thursday evening looked like they belonged in a magazine spread about elegant entertaining, but they had come for blood. "I still can't believe you actually did it," whispered Margaret Carver, accepting a glass of wine from Elise's hand. "When I got your invitation, I thought it was a book club or charity planning committee." "This is much more important than charity," replied Sophia Lin, formerly Sophia Chen, whose divorce from tech mogul Henry Lin had made headlines 2 years ago. "This is justice." Elise surveyed her guests with satisfaction. 6 women, all exquisitely dressed, all bearing scars from battles with powerful men who had underestimated them. Margaret Carver, whose husband Thomas had tried to hide assets during their divorce. Sophia, who had discovered her ex-husband's tax evasion schemes. Sophia Alvarez, who had survived a marriage to a construction magnate with ties to organized crime. And 3 others whose stories had intersected with Victor Langston in ways that left them hungry for retribution. "Ladies," Elise said, raising her glass of wine, "thank you for coming. I believe we all share something in common besides impeccable taste in attorneys. Laughter rippled through the room, but it had teeth. We've all been married to men who confused wealth with worth, said Isabella Torres, whose ex-husband had been one of Victor's early business partners. Men who thought marriage licenses were ownership papers. Men who stole our ideas and called them inspiration, added Charlotte Evans, a former architect whose designs had been appropriated by her developer husband. With Victor's enthusiastic encouragement, Elise nodded. Feeling the electric energy of women who had been pushed too far, I asked you here because I know Victor has affected all your lives, Elise began, her voice carrying quiet steel. Some of you lost money when he defaulted on deals. Some watched him steal credit from your husbands, then destroy them when they protested. And some of you, she looked directly at Isabella, have evidence of his illegal practices that you've been waiting for the right moment to use. Isabella's smile was sharp as a blade. I've been saving those offshore account records for a very special occasion. Consider this, that occasion. For the next 3 hours, they shared stories, documents, and evidence that painted a picture of Victor Langston as a serial predator who used charm and connections to exploit everyone around him, tax avoidance schemes that bordered on fraud, bribes to city officials disguised as consulting fees, shell companies designed to hide assets and launder money. Julian arrived at 10, having spent the evening reviewing legal precedents for their case. Elise introduced him to the group as the attorney who's going to help us make sure justice is served, and watched their faces light up with predatory satisfaction. Ladies, Julian said, settling into the chair Elise offered him. What you've compiled here is extraordinary. This level of evidence, financial records, correspondence, witness testimony, it's enough to destroy him completely. That's the idea, said Sophia with relish. The question is how to use it strategically, Julian continued, his gaze finding Elise's. We want to maximize impact while staying within legal boundaries. Margaret leaned forward. What's our timeline? The divorce proceedings begin in earnest next week, Elise replied. But this goes beyond my divorce. This is about making sure he can never do to another woman what he's done to all of us. After the women left, exchanging contact information and promises to stay in touch, Elise found herself alone with Julian in her living room. The brownstone, her secret retreat, felt different with him in it, warmer, more alive. You were magnificent tonight, he said, helping her carry glasses to the kitchen. Watching you orchestrate that meeting was like watching a masterclass in strategic thinking. It felt good, Elise admitted, loading the dishwasher. For 8 years, I felt like I was fighting alone. Tonight, I realized I never was. There were women everywhere who had been hurt by him, waiting for someone to organize them. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. No, I'm fighting for all of us. Julian moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Elise, I know. She turned to face him fully, her heart hammering against her ribs. This is complicated. It doesn't have to be. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. The touch sent electricity shooting through her entire body, awakening nerves that had been dormant for years. I'm still married, she said, but the words lacked conviction. To a man who served you divorce papers and tried to destroy your life, Julian replied, to a man who never deserved you and clearly doesn't want you. But legally, you're separated. Emotionally, you've been divorced for years. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer. When was the last time your husband looked at you the way I'm looking at you right now? The question hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time Victor had looked at her with desire, with admiration, with anything other than casual indifference? I don't remember, she whispered. I remember the first time I looked at you, Julian said softly. September 15th, first day of constitutional law. You wore a blue dress and sat in the front row. And when Professor Martinez asked about equal protection, you raised your hand and gave an answer that made half the class rethink everything they thought they knew about justice. The memory made her breath catch. You remember what I wore? I remember everything about that day. I remember thinking that I was in the presence of someone extraordinary, someone who was going to change the world. His thumb traced her lower lip, making her shiver. I was right. You did change the world. You changed mine. Julian, she began, but he was already leaning down, and when his lips touched hers, every rational thought fled her mind. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission, but when she melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt. He deepened it with a hunger that matched her own. Years of suppressed longing poured between them, the careful boundaries they had maintained crumbling like paper in rain. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured against her mouth. "Wanted you for so long." "We shouldn't," she said, even as her body pressed closer to his. "Why not? Give me one good reason that isn't about what other people might think or what's technically proper." She tried to find reasons, but they felt flimsy compared to the solid reality of his arms around her, the way he looked at her like she was precious and powerful and perfect, exactly as she was. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Of what?" "Of this being another mistake. Of getting my heart broken again. Of losing myself in another relationship where I give everything and get scraps in return." Julian pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "Elise, listen to me. I am not Victor. I would never dismiss your intelligence, never steal credit for your work, never treat you like an accessory in my life. You are extraordinary, and I would spend every day making sure you never forget it." The promise in his voice broke something open in her chest. How long had it been since someone had promised to cherish her rather than diminish her? "What if?" "No what ifs," he said firmly. "We are both adults. We both know what we want, and what I want is you not someday when it's convenient or proper, but right now, while you're in the middle of claiming your power and fighting for your future." He was right. She was tired of living by other people's rules, tired of denying herself happiness because it might complicate things. Her marriage was over in everything but paperwork. Her future was uncertain but entirely her own, to shape, and this man, this brilliant, principled, devastatingly attractive man, wanted her exactly as she was. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Instead of answering with words, she kissed him again, pouring 8 years of loneliness and frustration into the contact. He responded with matching intensity, his hands tangling in her hair, his body pressing her against the kitchen counter with delicious urgency. Upstairs, she gasped against his mouth, and he needed no further invitation. Her bedroom was bathed in moonlight, streaming through tall windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. Julian looked at her with something approaching reverence, his hands gentle as he reached for the buttons of her blouse. "Are you sure?" he asked, even as his fingers worked the silk free. "I'm sure," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. What followed was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Julian worshipped her body with the same patience and thoroughness he brought to legal briefs, learning every curve and hollow, discovering what made her gasp and arch and forget her own name. He made her feel beautiful, desired, powerful, everything Victor had slowly eroded over 8 years of casual neglect. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. "No regrets?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "None," she said, and was surprised to discover it was true. "Only that we waited this long." She smiled against his skin, feeling something shift inside her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles in her war against Victor. But tonight, she had remembered what it felt like to be valued, cherished, seen. Tonight, she had remembered that she deserved to be loved by someone worthy of her love in return. And as she drifted off to sleep in Julian's arms, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it as a woman who had reclaimed not just her power, but her right to happiness. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. Some battles were won with words, others with evidence. But the most decisive victories came from knowing your enemy's secrets better than they knew them themselves. Elise stood in the marble lobby of Langston Enterprises at precisely 9 inches the morning, watching the security guard's expression shift as he recognized her. 3 days ago, she would have walked through these doors as Miss Victor Langston, the invisible architect of the empire surrounding them. Today, she was something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose. "Ms. Langston," the guard stammered, clearly uncertain of protocol. "Mr. Langston isn't expecting you." "No," Elise replied with a smile that would have made sharks nervous. "He isn't." Julian emerged from the elevator bank, flanked by 2 process servers and carrying a briefcase that contained 8 years' worth of legal ammunition. He wore his courtroom armor, a perfectly tailored navy suit that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds, and moved with the controlled confidence of a man about to destroy someone who richly deserved it. "Good morning, Elise," he said formally. though his eyes held warmth reserved only for her. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for 8 years." The elevator ride to Victor's penthouse office was silent, but Elise could feel the tension radiating from Julian like heat from a forge. Last night had changed everything between them, not just physically, but strategically. They were no longer attorney and client. They were partners in every sense of the word. Victor's secretary tried to block their entrance, but process servers had legal authority that trumped corporate gatekeeping. The walnut doors to his office flew open to reveal her soon-to-be ex-husband behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly as he tried to explain to investors why his construction projects had suddenly ground to a halt. "Temporary supplier issue, nothing more," he was saying. But the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. "We'll have it resolved within." He looked up and saw her. The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, never taking his eyes off Elise. "Hello, Victor." She stepped into the office she had helped him design, noting how small it seemed now that she no longer lived in his shadow. "You look stressed. What are you doing here?" His voice held the tight control of a man barely containing panic. "Serving you with legal documents," Julian answered, nodding to the process servers. "Mr. Langston, you're being served with subpoenas demanding full disclosure of all financial assets, including overseas accounts, shell companies, and any funds held in trust or through third-party entities." The servers placed thick manila envelopes on Victor's desk with the ceremonial weight of guillotine blades. Elise watched her husband's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then blazing fury. "This is harassment," Victor snarled, ripping open the first envelope. "You can't just—" His voice died as he read the legal documents. "Where did you get this information?" Elisa smiled. "Amazing what you can discover when you actually pay attention to the business you're supposedly running." The subpoenas were masterpieces of legal warfare, each one targeting a specific aspect of Victor's financial empire. Bank records from accounts she had discovered through their shared business email, corporate filings for shell companies she had uncovered during her years of solving his crises. Investment documents that painted a clear picture of systematic tax avoidance and asset hiding. "You've been spying on me," Victor accused, his voice rising. "I've been watching you steal credit for my work while building a criminal enterprise." Elise replied calmly. "There's a difference." Julian moved closer to the desk, his presence a subtle threat. "Mr. Langston, I should inform you that failure to comply with these subpoenas will result in contempt of court charges. The financial penalties alone would be substantial, not to mention the criminal implications." "Criminal?" Victor laughed, but the sound was brittle with desperation. "You're bluffing." "The Pinnacle Steel account in the Cayman Islands," Elise said conversationally. "The one you used to pay bribes to city planning officials. Did you really think I wouldn't notice patterns in your unusually high approval rates?" The blood drained from Victor's face so quickly, Elise thought he might faint. "Or the Solara Holdings shell company," she continued, enjoying his growing panic. "The one that owns property in your name, but pays no taxes because it's registered in Delaware through a Panamanian subsidiary. Very creative, but also very illegal. You can't prove any of this." "Actually, she can." Julian opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder thick enough to use as a weapon. "Bank statements, wire transfer records, email communications, recorded phone calls, 8 years' worth of evidence that you've been systematically defrauding the IRS, bribing officials, and laundering money through fake construction projects." Victor stared at the folder like it contained his own death warrant. "How? You gave me access to everything, remember?" Elisa's voice was silk over steel. "Shared passwords, joint accounts, business email systems. You were so confident that I was just your pretty little wife that you never bothered to hide your crimes from me. I trusted you. You underestimated me. There's a difference." For a moment, they stared at each other across the desk, where she had once sat to solve his problems, now transformed into opposing generals in a war that only one of them could win. "What do you want?" Victor asked finally. "Full asset disclosure, fair division of marital property, and acknowledgement of my contributions to Langston Enterprises," Elise replied. "Plus criminal prosecution for your tax evasion and bribery schemes. You're destroying everything we built together." "We didn't build anything together, Victor. I built an empire while you took credit in magazine interviews." Elise leaned forward, letting him see the steel in her eyes. "Now I'm taking it back." The process servers left, their job completed. But Julian lingered in the doorway. "You have 72 hours to comply with the disclosure requirements," he told Victor. "After that, we file with the district attorney's office." As they rode the elevator down, Elise felt lighter than she had in years. The war was officially declared, the terms set, and for the first time, she held all the advantages. But Victor wasn't finished fighting. The first sign of his counterattack came that afternoon. Elise's phone rang as she reviewed documents in Julian's office, his name appearing on her screen with the persistence of a stalker. "Let it go to voicemail," Julian advised. But Elise shook her head. "Better to know what he's planning." Victor's voice was tight with controlled rage. "You think you're so smart. But you forgot one thing. I have connections, resources, friends in high places. I can make your life very difficult." "Is that a threat?" Elise asked, putting the phone on speaker so Julian could hear. "It's a promise. Cross me, and I'll destroy you in ways you can't imagine. I'll ruin your reputation, your career, your chances of ever working in this city again. And your boyfriend better watch his back, too. Accidents happen to lawyers who get too aggressive with powerful clients." The line went dead, leaving silence that crackled with menace. Julian was already reaching for his own phone. "I'm calling building security and the police." That was a direct threat. "He's scared," Elise said, though her hands were trembling slightly. "Scared men make stupid mistakes. They also make dangerous ones." By evening, Victor's retaliation was in full swing. Elise received calls from 3 potential clients canceling consulting contracts. Julian's firm was suddenly audited by the State Bar Association for irregularities in client representation. Their photographs appeared on a gossip blog with speculation about their affair and questions about the ethics of a lawyer sleeping with his client. "He's playing dirty," Julian said as they reviewed the damage from Elise's brownstone. "But he's also overplaying his hand." "How so?" "Everything he's doing proves our case. The threats, the attempts to intimidate us, the misuse of his connections to harm our careers. It all supports our argument that he's a man who abuses power and destroys people who cross him." Elise curled into the corner of her sofa, feeling the weight of the day settle on her shoulders. "I knew he would fight back, but seeing him try to hurt you because of me." Julian sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. "Hey, this isn't your fault. He's the one choosing to escalate this into something ugly. But you're suffering because you chose to help me." "I'm not suffering." His voice was firm, certain. "I'm fighting for something worth fighting for someone worth fighting for." She looked up at him, seeing the determination in his gray eyes, the strength in the set of his jaw. "You're not having second thoughts about representing me?" "Never." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. She didn't realize she was crying. "Elise, I've spent my entire career fighting for justice for people who couldn't fight for themselves, but I've never fought for anything as important as this. This case, you." The word hung between them, simple and devastating. "I'm fighting for you. For us. For the chance to build something real together." She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and fear and hope into the contact. He responded with matching intensity, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this battle anymore. "He thinks he can intimidate us into backing down," Julian murmured against her lips. "He doesn't know us very well." "No, he doesn't. He thinks you're the same invisible woman who let him steal credit for 8 years. He has no idea he's fighting a force of nature." That night, as they made love with desperate intensity, Elise felt the last of her old self slip away. The woman who had accepted scraps and lived in shadows was gone. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, more dangerous, someone who had finally learned that the most devastating weapon was the truth wielded by a woman with nothing left to lose. Tomorrow would bring new attacks, fresh cruelties, escalating warfare, but tonight, in Julian's arms, she felt invincible. Let Victor do his worst. She had already survived his best. Chapter 7. Love and War. The young man waiting outside Elise's brownstone looked like Victor Langston, stripped of 22 years and all pretense, with the same sharp cheekbones, but eyes that held integrity instead of calculation. Elise paused on her front steps, keys in hand, studying the stranger who had clearly been waiting for her return from the grocery store. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog everything about her. Her guarded posture, the way her hand moved instinctively to her phone, the careful distance she maintained. "Ms. Langston." His voice was younger than his appearance suggested, though it carried an odd formality. "I'm Ethan Langston. I think we need to talk." The surname hit her like cold water. She knew Victor had a son from his first marriage. A child he mentioned occasionally in passing, usually in the context of custody payments or obligatory holiday visits. But she had never met him. Victor kept his previous life carefully compartmentalized, as if acknowledging his failures as a father might tarnish his image as a successful businessman. "Ethan," she said carefully, "you're Victor's son." Unfortunately, the word carried a weight of pain that made her reconsider her instinct to retreat. "Could we talk, please? I have information you need to hear." Against every survival instinct screaming in her head, Elise found herself opening her front door. "Come in, but I should tell you that anything you say might be used in legal proceedings against your father. I'm counting on it." Ethan followed her into the living room, his eyes taking in the elegant space with obvious appreciation. "Nice place. He doesn't know about this, does he?" "How did you know that?" "Because he's been ranting for days about how you disappeared without a trace. How you're probably staying in some flea hotel plotting your revenge." Ethan's smile held no humor. "He has no idea you've been building your own empire while he wasn't paying attention." Elise studied the young man, 18, maybe 19, with his father's commanding presence but none of his arrogance. "Why are you here, Ethan?" "Because I've watched him destroy people my whole life, and I'm tired of pretending I don't see it." He sat forward, his expression intense. "I know what he did to you. I know how he stole credit for your work, how he treated you like an accessory instead of a partner. And I know about the illegal things, the offshore accounts, the bribes, the money laundering. You know about those. I've known for years. He thinks I'm just some college kid who comes around for money, but I've been watching him, documenting his crimes, waiting for someone brave enough to use the information." Ethan's eyes met hers with startling directness. "You're that someone." Before Elise could respond, her phone rang. "Julian, checking in after his afternoon in court," she answered, needing his presence for this conversation. "We have a visitor," she said without preamble. "Victor's son. He says he has information. I'll be right there." "You don't trust me," Ethan observed after she hung up. "I don't trust anyone associated with your father. Smart policy. But I'm not associated with him by choice." Ethan's voice hardened. "Do you want to know what it's like growing up as Victor Langston's son? Watching him charm everyone while knowing he's a liar and a cheat? Seeing him destroy my mother in court and then brag about it to his friends?" The pain in his voice was too raw to fake. "Ethan, he tried to buy my silence when I turned 18, offered me a trust fund if I agreed to never speak publicly about his business practices. I told him I'd rather be poor than complicit. He laughed bitterly. So now I'm poor and complicit by blood, which is somehow worse." Julian arrived 20 minutes later, his lawyer instincts immediately assessing the situation. Elise watched him study Ethan with professional skepticism, while Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "You're the attorney representing my stepmother," Ethan said, offering his hand. "Soon-to-be ex-stepmother," Julian corrected, but shook the offered hand. "And you're here because I have access to things she doesn't. Financial records, recorded conversations, private communications." Ethan reached into his jacket and withdrew a flash drive. "Everything I've collected over the past 3 years, waiting for the right moment to use it." Julian and Elise exchanged glances. This could be the break they needed, or an elaborate trap designed by Victor to discover their legal strategy. "Why now?" Julian asked. "Why risk your relationship with your father to help someone you barely know?" Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "Because she's the first person who ever stood up to him and had a chance of winning." For the next hour, they reviewed the contents of the flash drive on Elise's laptop. Financial spreadsheets detailing cash payments to city officials, audio recordings of Victor bragging about tax evasion schemes, email chains between Victor and his accountant, discussing how to hide assets from potential divorce proceedings. "He's been planning to leave you for over a year," Ethan said quietly as they listened to one particularly damning conversation. The affair, the divorce papers, the asset protection, all of it was calculated. Elise felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had known about the affair, suspected the financial manipulation, but hearing the clinical way Victor discussed discarding her still hurt. "There's more," Ethan continued. "He's been funneling money into accounts under my name, thinking he could claim it was gifts to his son, and therefore protected from divorce proceedings." "That's fraud," Julian said immediately. "I never asked for it, never touched it, never even knew about most of it, until I started investigating." Ethan's voice carried quiet fury. He's been using me as a shield for his crimes since I was 16. Julian studied the young man with new respect. What do you want from us? Nothing. I just want him to finally face consequences for what he's done. Ethan met Elise's eyes. He destroyed my mother, humiliated her in court, and then spent years bragging about how he had outmaneuvered her legal team. I was 14 when she died, still trying to rebuild her life after he'd finished with her. The words hung in the room like a judgment. Elise felt the weight of recognition. She could have been Ethan's mother, broken and discarded after years of being systematically diminished. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be sorry. Win. Ethan's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Use everything I've given you to destroy him so completely that he can never do this to anyone else. As Ethan prepared to leave, he turned back to Elise. For what it's worth, I think you're extraordinary. I've watched you solve problems he couldn't even understand, seen you build strategies that saved projects everyone else had given up on. You deserve so much better than him. After he left, Elise and Julian sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what they had gained and what it meant. This changes everything, Julian said finally. With Ethan's evidence, we don't just have a divorce case. We have criminal prosecution, civil lawsuits, complete financial destruction. His own son, Elise murmured. His own son hates him enough to testify against him. That should tell you something about the man you married. She looked at Julian. This man who saw her worth and fought for her happiness, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost overwhelming. What did I do to deserve you? You were brave enough to fight back. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with the careful intensity of someone who understood how precious and fragile happiness could be. You were strong enough to survive him, and brilliant enough to defeat him. We're really going to do this, aren't we? We're going to destroy him. We're going to expose him, Julian corrected. Justice will destroy him. We're just going to make sure it happens. That night, they made love with desperate intensity, as if the approaching court date had compressed all their emotions into these stolen moments. Julian worshipped her body, like a man memorizing every curve and hollow, every sigh and gasp, storing up sensations against an uncertain future. Whatever happens, he whispered against her skin, I want you to know that meeting you again, fighting beside you, loving you, it's been the greatest privilege of my life. Don't talk like this is goodbye, Elise said, threading her fingers through his hair. It's not goodbye. It's preparation for whatever comes next. He raised himself up to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the moonlight. I love you, Elise. Not just the brilliant woman who's been hiding in plain sight for 8 years, but the warrior who emerged when she finally had enough. I love you too, she admitted, the words feeling like both surrender and victory. I love your integrity, your compassion, the way you see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves. They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found love in the middle of a war, knowing that tomorrow would bring new battles and fresh challenges. But tonight, they had each other. Tonight, they had Ethan's evidence and the promise of justice. Tonight, they had everything they needed to win. Chapter 8. The Boardroom Coup. The morning of the court hearing dawned gray and ruthless, Manhattan wrapped in fog that seemed to mirror the uncertainty hanging over Elise's carefully constructed battle plan. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her brownstone, watching the city wake up while Julian reviewed their final strategy from the dining room table. Coffee cups and legal documents created a landscape of preparation around him. His shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. A gesture she had learned signaled deep concentration. The investors agreed to meet us at Langston Enterprises at 9, he said without looking up from the contract modifications. Thomas Carver, Sophia Lynn, and Daniel Way, 3 of the most powerful voices on his board of directors. 3 people I introduced to Victor personally, Elise replied, turning away from the window. 3 people whose trust he's about to lose forever, along with their financial backing. The irony was exquisite. For 8 years, Elise had been Victor's secret weapon in securing investors, using her analytical brilliance and natural charm to convince wealthy individuals to trust Langston Enterprises with their money. She had cultivated relationships, solved problems, and maintained the confidence that kept capital flowing into Victor's projects. Now those same relationships would become the instruments of his destruction. At 8:30, Elise and Julian arrived at Langston Enterprises to find the 3 investors already waiting in the building's marble lobby, their faces grim with the knowledge of what they were about to witness. Thomas Carver, whose pension fund had invested $40 million in Victor's developments, Sophia Lynn, whose tech fortune had funded 3 major projects, Daniel Way, whose family's construction empire had been built on trust and integrity values that made Victor's crimes particularly offensive to him. "Are you certain about this evidence?" Daniel asked as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. "Because if we move forward and you're wrong—" "We're not wrong," Julian replied firmly. "The documentation is irrefutable, and you're prepared to testify that you introduced these investors to Mr. Langston based on your analysis of his projects," he asked Elise. "I'm prepared to testify that I conceived, designed, and managed every project they invested in, while Victor took credit and collected fees." Elise's voice was steady as stone. "I'm prepared to testify that their money was secured through my expertise and protected by my oversight, not his." The boardroom of Langston Enterprises was exactly as Elise remembered. Polished walnut, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, and an atmosphere of masculine power that had always made her feel like an intruder in her own success. But today, walking in beside Julian with 3 of Manhattan's most influential investors at her back, she felt like she belonged there. Victor was already present, flanked by his attorney, Nathaniel Sterling, and 2 board members who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the emergency meeting they had been summoned to attend. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, and then blazing fury as he realized what was happening. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, rising from his chair at the head of the table. "Sit down, Victor," Thomas Carver said coldly. "We're here to discuss the future of Langston Enterprises, and your role in it." "My role? I am Langston Enterprises. Are you?" Sophia Lynn opened her leather portfolio and withdrew a thick folder. "Because the evidence suggests that your wife has been the actual architect of every successful project this company has undertaken in the past 8 years." The folder hit the table with the weight of revelation. Financial analyses in Elise's handwriting, project proposals bearing her electronic signature but presented under Victor's name, email chains showing her solving crises while he took public credit for the solutions. "This is ridiculous," Victor blustered, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "Elise is my wife, not my business partner. She doesn't have the expertise to—" "The Riverfront project," Daniel Way interrupted, consulting his own files, "environmental impact mitigation that saved us $12 million in penalties. Who designed that strategy?" Victor opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly caught between lying to investors who would soon discover the truth anyway and admitting his dependence on the woman he was currently divorcing. "The Brooklyn waterfront development," Sophia continued. "Community integration protocols that turned a potential public relations disaster into a model for responsible urban development. Who conceived that approach?" We worked together." "No, Victor." Elise spoke for the first time since entering the room, her voice cutting through his stammering with surgical precision. "I worked. You took credit." She stood, moving to the presentation screen at the front of the room, and activated a PowerPoint that Julian had helped her prepare. Financial projections, project timelines, problem-solving methodologies, all in her distinctive analytical style, all bearing electronic signatures that proved her authorship. "The Whitestone Project," she said, clicking to the first slide, "zoning complications that threatened a $20 million investment. I identified the issues 3 months before groundbreaking. I negotiated with city officials. I restructured the development timeline to comply with environmental regulations." Another click. Victor's contribution was taking photographs with city council members after I had resolved all the issues. The room was silent except for the soft sound of pages turning as the investors reviewed documentation that painted a clear picture of systematic credit theft. "The Hillcrest development," Elise continued. "Soil instability that required complete foundation redesign. I brought in geological consultants, restructured the engineering specifications, and managed a crisis that could have bankrupted the project." She looked directly at Victor. "Your contribution was giving interviews about your innovative problem-solving approach." "That's enough," Victor said, his voice tight with rage. "No," Daniel Way replied. "It's not nearly enough, Ms. Langston. Please continue." For the next 30 minutes, Elise systematically dismantled 8 years of lies project after project, where her expertise had saved investments, her strategic thinking had solved problems, and her relationship skills had maintained crucial partnerships. The investors listened with growing outrage as the scope of the deception became clear. "Gentlemen, lady," Julian said when Elise finished her presentation. "I believe you now understand the situation. The woman you trusted to protect your investments has been systematically erased from the record of her own accomplishments. This is a witch hunt," Victor protested. "A bitter divorce proceeding that has no place in this boardroom. Actually," Sophia Lynn said with icy precision, "this has everything to do with our investments, because if Elise leaves Langston Enterprises, our projects lose the strategic mind that made them successful in the first place." Thomas Carver nodded. "Which brings us to the reason for this meeting. We are prepared to support new leadership for Langston Enterprises, conditional on certain management changes." The contract they placed on the table was elegant in its simplicity. A restructuring agreement that would transfer operational control of Langston Enterprises to a new executive team with Elise as chief strategic officer and the 3 investors as primary board members. Victor would retain his title as founder and a minority stake in the company, but real power would reside with the people who could actually run the business successfully. "You can't do this," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We can, and we are," Daniel replied. "Our investment agreements include clauses allowing for leadership changes in cases of fiduciary breach or operational incompetence. Your systematic misrepresentation of company capabilities qualifies on both counts. Besides," Sophia added with a smile that would have made wolves nervous, "Elise has agreed to stay with the company under new management. Without her, you have no credible leadership for projects worth over $200 million. Elise watched Victor's face as the reality of his situation penetrated his arrogance. He could fight the restructuring and lose everything when the investors withdrew their support, or he could accept minority status in the empire he had built on stolen credit. "What guarantee do I have that this isn't just revenge?" he asked desperately. "You don't," Elise replied simply, "but then, you never gave me any guarantees either." The investors signed the restructuring agreement with ceremonial solemnity. Each signature, another nail in the coffin of Victor's unchallenged authority. When the documents were complete, Elise found herself holding a contract that made her the effective head of the company. She had always run from the shadows. "Congratulations, Chief Strategic Officer Langston," Thomas Carver said, shaking her hand. "I think this company is going to be more successful than it's ever been." As the meeting broke up and the investors departed, Victor sat alone at the boardroom table, staring at papers that reduced him to a figurehead in his own company. The man who had dismissed her as his lovely wife now faced the prospect of watching her succeed in roles he could never fill. "This isn't over," he said, as Elise and Julian prepared to leave. "Yes, it is," Julian replied calmly. "The only question now is whether you accept your diminished role gracefully or force us to pursue criminal charges for your financial crimes." Outside Langston Enterprises, Elise and Julian stood on the sidewalk, breathing air that tasted like freedom and victory. "How do you feel?" he asked, studying her face in the morning light. "Powerful," she said, surprising herself with the word. "For the first time in 8 years, I feel powerful." "Good. Because this afternoon we finish him in court." As they walked toward the courthouse where her divorce would be finalized and her new life would officially begin, Elise reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From invisible wife to corporate executive, from victim to victor. From a woman who accepted scraps to one who claimed everything she deserved. The war wasn't over yet, but she could already taste victory, and it was sweeter than she had ever imagined. Chapter 9. The reckoning begins. The courtroom felt like a coliseum where gladiators came to die, and Elise Moreau walked into it like a woman who had already counted the cost of victory. Judge Evelyn Hart presided over courtroom 3B with the no-nonsense authority of someone who had witnessed every variety of human failure and found them all equally tedious. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her reading glasses perched precisely on her nose, and her expression suggested she would tolerate neither grandstanding nor incompetence from the attorneys appearing before her. "This is it," Julian murmured as they took their seats at the plaintiff's table. "Everything we've worked for comes down to the next few hours." Elise nodded, her hands steady as she arranged her notes. Behind them, the gallery was packed with reporters, society watchers, and business associates drawn by the promise of watching Manhattan royalty destroy each other in public. She could feel their eyes on her, measuring her composure, waiting for signs of the emotional breakdown that surely had to come. They would be disappointed. Across the aisle, Victor sat beside Nathaniel Sterling, his expensive suit armor against the ignominy of being publicly exposed as a fraud. He looked confident, even arrogant, clearly believing that his wealth and connections would protect him from the consequences of his actions. He was about to learn otherwise. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his opening statement delivered with the practiced ease of a man who charged $1,000 an hour. "This is a simple case of a marriage that has run its course. My client, Mr. Victor Langston, has built a real estate empire through hard work, vision, and entrepreneurial brilliance. The prenuptial agreement, signed by both parties, clearly delineates asset division in the event of divorce. Ms. Moreau is attempting to circumvent that agreement through baseless accusations and emotional manipulation. He painted Elise as a gold digger, a bitter wife seeking revenge through the legal system, a woman whose contributions to Langston Enterprises were minimal and whose current claims were motivated by greed rather than justice. Mr. Langston has been generous throughout this marriage," Sterling continued. "He provided his wife with a comfortable lifestyle, social status, and the security that comes from being married to a successful businessman. Now, faced with the natural conclusion of their relationship, she seeks to destroy him rather than accept the terms they both agreed to 8 years ago. It was masterfully done, casting Victor as the reasonable party and Elise as the vindictive ex-wife whose accusations were motivated by spite rather than substance. But Julian was ready for him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him one of Manhattan's most respected litigators. "My client is not seeking revenge. She is seeking justice. For 8 years, Elise Moreau has been the invisible architect of her husband's success, the strategic mind behind every major project that built the Langston Enterprises empire. Today, we will prove that the assets Mr. Langston claims as his own were created through my client's expertise, maintained through her relationships, and protected through her constant problem-solving." Julian moved to the evidence table, his movements deliberate and confident. "We will show that Mr. Langston has engaged in systematic credit theft, financial fraud, and criminal tax evasion. We will demonstrate that without my client's contributions, Langston Enterprises would have collapsed years ago, and we will prove that the prenuptial agreement was signed under conditions of financial misrepresentation that render it null and void." The first witness was Thomas Carver, who testified about Elise's role in securing his initial investment in Langston Enterprises. "Ms. Moreau presented the most thorough financial analysis I had ever seen," he said under Julian's questioning. "She had identified every potential risk, developed mitigation strategies, and created profit projections that proved accurate to within 2% over a 3-year period. It was her expertise that convinced me to invest, not her husband's charm." "And who did you believe was responsible for this analysis at the time?" "Mr. Langston presented it as his own work. I only learned the truth this week when Miss Moreau showed me the original documents in her handwriting." Sophia Lynn testified next, describing how Elise had personally guided her through complex zoning issues that threatened the Brooklyn waterfront project. "She understood regulatory law better than most attorneys," Sophia said. "She could see problems that wouldn't manifest for months and develop solutions that others missed entirely. Every conversation I had with her made me more confident in my investment. Every conversation with her husband made me less so." Daniel Way's testimony was particularly damaging, as he detailed how Elise had saved the Hillcrest development from collapse through innovative engineering solutions. "Without her intervention, we would have lost $40 million, he said flatly. Mr. Langston contributed nothing to that solution except his signature on documents she had prepared. Sterling's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. He couldn't challenge the documented evidence of Elise's authorship, couldn't dispute the timeline of her problem-solving, couldn't explain away the stark contrast between her strategic thinking and Victor's superficial understanding of his own projects. Then Ethan Langston took the stand. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Victor's son walked to the witness box, his resemblance to his father unmistakable. But his demeanor entirely different. Where Victor projected arrogance, Ethan carried himself with quiet dignity. Where Victor commanded attention, Ethan simply deserved it. "Mr. Langston," Julian began, "what is your relationship to the defendant?" "He is my biological father," Ethan replied, his voice steady, though he has never acted in that capacity. The words hung in the courtroom like an indictment. Victor shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly unprepared for his son's public declaration of their relationship. "Can you tell the court about your observations of the marriage between your father and Miss Moreau?" I witnessed my stepmother solve problems that my father created through incompetence or carelessness. I watched her work 18-hour days to save projects he had endangered through poor planning. I saw her create strategies that he would later claim as his own innovations. Did you ever hear your father acknowledge Miss Moreau's contributions? Never in public. Privately, he would sometimes joke about how lucky he was that his wife was smarter than he was. But publicly, he maintained the fiction that she was simply a supportive spouse. Sterling's objection was overruled, and Ethan continued his testimony with devastating precision. He described overhearing conversations where Victor planned to divorce Elise while hiding assets. He detailed his father's systematic tax evasion and money laundering schemes. He presented recorded phone calls where Victor bragged about manipulating regulatory officials through bribes. "Mr. Langston," Julian said finally, "why are you testifying against your own father?" Ethan looked directly at Victor for the first time since taking the stand. "Because someone has to speak for the people he's destroyed. My mother, my stepmother, every investor who trusted him based on work that wasn't his own, every employee who lost their job when projects failed due to his incompetence." Objection. Sterling leaped to his feet. "The witness is making speeches, not answering questions." "Sustained," Judge Hart said. But her expression suggested she was finding Ethan's speeches more informative than most of the legal arguments she had heard. The afternoon brought financial experts who dissected Victor's hidden assets, forensic accountants who traced money through labyrinthine shell companies, and former employees who testified about Elise's behind-the-scenes problem-solving. But the most devastating testimony came from Isabella Torres, the wife of Victor's former business partner. "Ms. Moreau called me 3 days ago," Isabella said under direct examination. "She asked if I would be willing to share what I knew about my late husband's business relationship with Mr. Langston." "And what did you know?" Isabella opened her purse and withdrew a small digital recorder. "My husband suspected that Mr. Langston was stealing intellectual property and hiding assets. Before he died, he gave me this recording of a conversation between them." The courtroom fell silent as Isabella activated the device. Victor's voice filled the space, clear and unmistakable, discussing how to transfer assets offshore to avoid divorce settlements and how to claim credit for projects developed by subordinates and spouses. "That wife of mine is worth her weight in gold." The recording captured him saying, "Too bad she's too trusting to realize how much I'm stealing from her." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Several people gasped audibly. Reporters scribbled frantically. Victor's face went white as he realized that his own words had just destroyed any remaining credibility he might have had. Judge Hart called for a brief recess, and Elise found herself surrounded by the controlled chaos of a legal victory that was still unfolding. "He's finished," Julian said quietly. "Even if we stopped here, the judge has enough evidence to void the prenup and award you everything." "But we're not stopping here," Elise replied, watching Victor huddle with his attorney at the defendant's table. He destroyed too many people to get off with just financial penalties. The criminal referral will happen automatically now. Tax evasion, bribery, fraud. He's looking at serious federal charges. Elise nodded, feeling the weight of 8 years lifting from her shoulders. Justice was finally within reach, complete and devastating and long overdue. But as court prepared to resume for final arguments, she knew the most satisfying moment was still to come. Tomorrow, when the judge rendered final judgment, Victor Langston would learn what it felt like to lose everything to someone he had dismissed as powerless. Tomorrow, the invisible woman would finally be seen, and her victory would be absolute. Chapter 10. Empire of Justice. The gavel fell like thunder, and with it, 8 years of invisible servitude shattered into 1,000 pieces of sweet, devastating justice. In the matter of Langston versus Langston, Judge Hart announced, her voice cutting through the packed courtroom with surgical precision, "This court finds the prenuptial agreement null and void due to financial misrepresentation and fraud. Furthermore, based on overwhelming evidence of Ms. Moreau's contributions to the marital estate, the court awards her 75% of all Langston Enterprises assets, including real property, business interests, and liquid assets." Elise felt the words wash over her like cleansing rain. 75%, not the scraps Victor had tried to leave her with, not the minimal settlement his lawyer had demanded, but recognition of what she had actually built. Additionally, Judge Hart continued, the court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of tax evasion, bribery, and money laundering charges against Mr. Victor Langston. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically while photographers captured Victor's face, white as paper, eyes wide with the shock of a man who had never imagined consequences could find him. His empire, built on stolen credit and criminal schemes, was crumbling in real time. But Elise wasn't watching him anymore. She was looking at Ethan, who sat in the gallery with tears streaming down his face, not of sadness, but of relief that justice had finally found his father. Furthermore, the judge added, raising her voice above the commotion, the court orders immediate transfer of operational control of Langston Enterprises to Ms. Elise Moreau, effective today. It was over. Not just the marriage, not just the divorce proceedings, but the entire 8-year nightmare of being erased from her own success. She was free, vindicated, and more powerful than she had ever dared imagine. Julian leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. How does it feel to be visible? Terrifying, she admitted, then smiled, and absolutely perfect. As they gathered their documents and prepared to leave, Victor approached their table. His expensive suit couldn't disguise the defeat written in every line of his body. "This isn't over, Elise," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is." She stood to face him, no longer the invisible woman he had dismissed for so long. "It's been over since the moment you underestimated me. I made you," he said desperately. "Without me, you would never have had the opportunities. Without you, I would have had credit for my own work 8 years sooner." Her voice was calm, final. "Goodbye, Victor." Ethan waited for them in the courthouse hallway, his eyes bright with emotion. "I'm sorry," he said to Elise. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find the courage to help you." "You found it when it mattered," she replied, surprising herself by pulling him into a hug. "Your testimony made the difference. What happens now?" he asked. Elise looked at Julian, seeing her own certainty reflected in his gray eyes. "Now we build something better, something honest." 3 weeks later, Elise stood in the executive office that had once belonged to Victor, but the space had been completely transformed. Gone were the masculine leather and dark wood that had proclaimed male dominance. In their place were floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light, contemporary furniture that prioritized function over intimidation, and photographs of actual project sites instead of magazine covers, featuring her ex-husband's face. The nameplate on her desk read, Elise Moreau, Chief Executive Officer. She had reclaimed her maiden name along with her empire. "The Whitestone project is ahead of schedule," Ethan reported, consulting his tablet as he delivered the weekly update. At 19, he had proven himself a gifted project coordinator with his father's charisma but his stepmother's ethics. "The community integration initiatives are working exactly as you designed them." Elisa smiled. Ethan had chosen to stay with the company after Victor's arrest, preferring to rebuild something positive from the wreckage of his father's legacy. The FBI had taken Victor into custody the previous week, facing charges that would likely result in decades in federal prison. "The riverfront development?" she asked. "Environmental assessments complete, all permits approved, community support at 92%. Ethan's pride was obvious. "The press is calling it a model for responsible urban development, because it is." Elise turned to look out at the city skyline. Manhattan spread below her like a conquered kingdom. "What else?" "The Carver Group wants to discuss 3 new projects. Sophia Lynn is proposing a joint venture for sustainable housing, and Daniel Way's family is interested in expanding our West Coast operations." Success built on her own merit, her own strategies, her own reputation. It was intoxicating. "Oh," Ethan added with barely contained excitement, and Julian called, "He's finished with court for the day and wondered if you were free for dinner." Elise's smile softened. Julian had been patient through the chaotic weeks of legal proceedings and corporate restructuring, supporting her transformation without trying to control it. Their relationship had deepened through shared victory, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. "Tell him I'll meet him at Gramercy Park at 7, she said. "I have something important to ask him." That evening, Elise found Julian waiting for her on their favorite bench in the private park, the same spot where she had called him in tears the day she was served divorce papers. He looked distinguished in his gray suit, his silver hair catching the light from vintage lampposts, his expression warming as she approached. "Chief Executive Officer," he said, standing to greet her with a kiss. "How does absolute power feel?" "Lonely," she admitted, settling beside him. "Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "That depends on how you feel about mergers." Elise turned to face him fully, her heart hammering with nervous excitement. Personal ones, I mean. Are you proposing? Yes. She pulled a small velvet box from her purse, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band that caught the lamplight like captured starfire. Julian Kessler, you saved my life, fought for my justice, and showed me what love looks like when it comes from someone who values my mind as much as my heart. Will you marry me? His laughter was pure joy. Only you would propose a corporate merger in a public park. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, he kissed her with the passion of a man who had waited his entire life for this moment. When they broke apart, both breathless, he took the ring from the box and slipped it onto his own finger. It's a yes to everything, he said, to marriage, to partnership, to building an empire together based on respect instead of exploitation. As they walked home through the city lights, Elise reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost a husband who never valued her, but gained a partner who saw her true worth. She had lost the illusion of a perfect marriage, but gained the reality of perfect justice. And Ethan, dear Ethan, who had found the courage to choose honor over blood, had gained a mother who would never let anyone diminish his worth. The empire she had built in shadows was now hers to run in full sunlight, with the man she loved beside her and a son who had chosen to call her family. Victor had tried to erase her, to reduce her to an accessory in his gilded life. Instead, he had awakened a force of nature who would spend the rest of her life proving that the most dangerous enemy is a brilliant woman who finally realizes her own power. Justice, Elise discovered, tasted exactly like freedom, and freedom, shared with the right person, was the sweetest revenge of all.